What does true greatness really look like? In our world, power, influence, and wealth often define success. But in Mark 10, Jesus flips that idea upside down. He teaches us that the greatest in the kingdom must become a servant. He predicts his death for the third time, and in the final scene, a blind man named Bartimaeus cries out to Jesus, and he's demonstrating a faith that refuses to be silenced. If you've ever struggled with pride, ambition, or simply wondered what it means to truly follow Christ, this section of Mark 10 is for you. Let's dive in. Hi, welcome to By Grace Through Faith. I'm your host, Bree. Today, we are once again continuing in Mark. We are jumping back into Mark 10, and we're going to look at the second half of it. We're going to be starting off with verse 32, where Jesus once again predicts his death. And it starts out, they were now on the way up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. The disciples were filled with awe, and the people following behind were overwhelmed with fear. Taking the 12 disciples aside, Jesus once more began to describe everything that was about to happen to him. "Listen," he said, "we're going up to Jerusalem, where the Son of Man will be betrayed to the leading priests and the teachers of religious law. They will sentence him to die and hand him over to the Romans. They will mock him, spit on him, flog him with a whip, and kill him, but after 3 days he will rise again." So to set the scene, here we are. The journey is continuing for Jesus and his disciples. They're on the road to Jerusalem. But this is not just any trip. It's actually the final journey before Jesus reaches the cross. In Mark, he paints a striking image. Jesus is walking ahead, leading the way, while the disciples follow behind, and they're both amazed and afraid. This is the third time in Mark's gospel that Jesus actually predicts his death. But this time he gives more details. He says the Son of Man will be delivered to the chief priests and the scribes. They're going to condemn him to death and hand him over to the Gentiles. He's going to be mocked, spit on, flogged, and killed. But after 3 days, he will rise. Now, each time Jesus predicts his death, the disciples still struggle to understand. They expect a Messiah who will overthrow Rome and establish a glorious earthly kingdom. But Jesus is telling them that victory will come through suffering, not through the conquest that they think it will. And this is a major turning point in the Gospel of Mark. The disciples are following Jesus, but they still don't really grasp the cost of discipleship. They're amazed and at the same time afraid, and they're sensing that something big is about to happen. Yet they still don't understand that Jesus is leading them to the cross and not necessarily a throne. And another layer to this is Jesus isn't just predicting his suffering, he's actually embracing it. He's not being dragged to Jerusalem against his will. He's leading the way. He knows exactly what awaits him, yet he's walking forward with courage and purpose. So this isn't a tragic ending to his ministry. It's actually the very mission that he came to fulfill. Everything else is leading up to this moment. And like I said, they don't understand that Jesus is leading them to the cross and not a throne. And that comes up in the next portion of the scripture as two of his disciples make a bold and a little tone deaf of a request. It starts in verse 35. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came over and spoke to him. "Teacher," they said, "we want you to do us a favor." "What is your request?" he asked. They replied, "When you sit on your glorious throne, we want to sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left." But Jesus said to them, "You don't know what you are asking. Are you able to drink from the bitter cup of suffering I am about to drink? Are you able to be baptized with the baptism of suffering I must be baptized with?" "Oh, yes," they replied, "we are able." Then Jesus told them, "You will indeed drink from my bitter cup and be baptized with my baptism of suffering. But I have no right to say who will sit on my right or my left. God has prepared those places for the ones he has chosen." When the 10 other disciples heard what James and John had asked, they were indignant. So Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the rulers in this world lord over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must be the slave of everyone else. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as ransom for many. So what a way to transition from what Jesus was just talking about, predicting his death, to the request that James and John make as they pull Jesus aside. Jesus has just told them about being tortured and killed and flogged, and their biggest concern is status, honor, a place of power in his kingdom being on his left and his right hand. Now Jesus, he looks at them and says, y'all don't know what you're asking. You think you can drink from this cup, but you can't. Even though they said that they can, they have no idea what's about to come. And Jesus replies that's not even his place to determine who's going to be on his left and his right. James and John don't realize that following Jesus means following him to the cross. In fact, to jump ahead a bit later in their lives, James is going to be martyred and John will suffer in exile. So they have no idea what they're even signing up for, being his disciples, and yet they're trying to take this cup. They're trying to take on this suffering. And the other disciples hear about this and they get angry. And it's not because they're more righteous, but because they also want these positions. So Jesus has to gather them together and tell them that's not what they should be focusing on. It is countercultural to what they even know at the time. And he gives the heart of his message that true greatness isn't about power or recognition. It's about humility, service, and sacrifice. In a world that tells us to climb the ladder, get more power, do more, Jesus is calling us to step down and lift other people up. And that's the same in society today when it comes to leadership, whether that's in business, church, or even families. The greatest leaders aren't those who demand to be served. I'm sure we can all think of those people who are in leadership and it's like, man, they are really pumping it up. But the ones that do the best jobs as leaders are those who serve others. And Jesus is calling us to a different kind of leadership, a leadership that mirrors his own. He came not to be served, but to serve. And he's asking, of course, for us to do the same. Now, as Jesus and his disciples leave Jericho, we meet someone who understands faith better than any of them. And that's a blind beggar named Bartimaeus. And we're going to continue in verse 46. Then they reached Jericho, and as Jesus and his disciples left town, a large crowd followed him. A blind beggar named Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, was sitting beside the road. When Bartimaeus heard that Jesus of Nazareth was nearby, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." "Be quiet," many of the people yelled at him, but he only shouted louder, "Son of David, have mercy on me." When Jesus heard him, he stopped and said, "Tell him to come here." So they called the blind man. "Cheer up," they said. "Come on, he's calling you." Bartimaeus threw aside his coat, jumped up, and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked. "My rabbi," the blind man said, "I want to see." And Jesus said to him, "Go, for your faith has healed you." Instantly the man could see, and he followed Jesus down the road. Now, one thing that struck me is this man has always been referred to as blind Bartimaeus. But why couldn't he just be called his name? He didn't have to be reminded of his circumstance. I'm sure that he knows that he's blind, but it's just like people to name you something about your situation. But can I tell you, you are not your situation. You don't have to be blind Bartimaeus. You don't have to be, I don't know, drunk Debbie. You don't have to be alcoholic Adam. You don't have to be drug taking David, whatever. It doesn't matter. You are not your circumstance. What they call you, you don't have to answer by. We serve a God. We have a Savior who is able to deliver us from all of that. So that's just something that has bothered me. He's more than his situation. He's more than his sickness. He's more than his circumstance. Jesus didn't call him that. Jesus only wanted to heal him. Jesus wasn't worried about his circumstance. He was just worried about healing him. So you don't have to be the same way. And while Bartimaeus was physically blind, he had clearer spiritual vision than the disciples. He knew that Jesus was the Messiah, and his faith wasn't passive. He cried out and cried out louder and persisted, and he acted in response to Jesus. And unlike the rich young ruler that we talked about in part 1, Bartimaeus leaves everything behind to follow Jesus. His faith wasn't just about receiving sight. It was also about recognizing who Jesus truly is. Sometimes we can be tempted to let the voices around us or doubt, fear, other people silence our faith. But Bartimaeus shows us that real faith doesn't give up. It presses in even when the world says be quiet, even when the world says give up, even when the world or others may say that's always going to be your situation. Can I tell you that Jesus is a deliverer? You don't have to live with that situation, and you can receive your healing, whatever it may be. So let's look at some of the key points that we've been able to look over in this portion of Mark. First, true greatness is found in serving others, not seeking power. That is the way to be the greatest in the kingdom, is to serve others. Secondly, following Jesus requires humility and trust. It's like a child trusting their parent or a blind man reaching out in faith. Just follow Jesus. I know it takes humility. That's what he's looking for. It takes you not following your own way and trusting in his ways and his plans. But I can tell you that is going to be the pathway to deliverance and to building your faith. And lastly, Jesus calls us to surrender, not just our possessions, but our pride, our ambition, and our whole lives. So for your reflection today, I'd like to ask you, where are you seeking status instead of service? Are you really good at serving at church, but have a harder time serving in your workplace? Are you really looking to climb the corporate ladder, but are not willing to maybe do more at home? Where are you looking for status instead of service? I encourage you to have that reflection. So that's all that we have for Mark 10. Stay tuned for Mark 11, where Jesus is going to enter Jerusalem as king, but not in the way that people expected, just the way that Jesus has always been. Well, I hope to see you next time. Bye.